guys, Prowl 1701 here. Today we're going to review episode 3 of The Massacre, which is Priest of Death. This is the episode where it becomes just how apparent to me that the televised version of this story is drastically different from the novelization, because I have read the novelization before, and the novelization, which is written by the same person who did the original version of the televised version, which was edited heavily before it was transmitted. You can see how much changed in the developments of the script, partially because Hartnell was on holiday in episode 2, and partially for budget reasons. But it's almost interesting with episode 3 is, even though I've read the novelization, I don't quite know what's going to happen or in the sequence of events that's going to happen. I'll talk about the episode first, and then I'll talk about differences with the novelization. The episode I enjoy. We get Hartnell back, but not as the Doctor. The Doctor is not in this episode, but we do have Hartnell playing the Abbot. Briefly, he's not in this as much as I would think he was going to be, having read the novelization. His performance as the Abbot is fine. Stephen features in this episode more, though not as much as episode 2. He still has his parts where he's talking with Anne at the beginning about going back to the Abbot's house. They have a little disagreement there where he convinces her to come with him. And then, of course, there is a scene where when he meets the Abbot, he still thinks it's the Doctor in disguise and chats with him. Then when he's listening in on the Abbot, when the Abbot's having a conversation with somebody else and realizes the Abbot's involved in the murder plot somehow, even though he still thinks it's the Doctor, he realizes the sea beggar is the Admiral, so he runs back to Nicholas to warn him so they can prevent the Admiral getting shot. Which the Admiral still gets shot, but he's only wounded, not killed, which is done differently than the novel too. The Recon's doing a good job with this. Even the action sequences, because this episode does have, it's a little more action heavy with the assassination attempt and all of that. The Recon gets that through well enough to make it acceptable viewing. Again, my hat's off to the loose cannon people. I think they've done a really good job with this, considering no telesnaps and no surviving footage. It's very impressive. What really gets me is the guest cast have a bit of a chance to shine in this. A lot of this episode features meetings between the king and his cabinet. Of course, the Catholic side and the Protestant side, and the arguing going on there. Of course, you have the Admiral. You have the other guy who's kind of the marshal or whatever for the Catholic side. I forget his name, although I recognize that actor. And then you have another actor I also recognize. I think his name might be like Michael Bilton, maybe. I think he plays a guy named, I got it on the screen there, Teligny or something like that. That actor looks familiar. I'm pretty sure he's in other episodes of Classic Who. Matter of fact, I'm going to be honest, he looks kind of like the butler from Pyramids of Mars. I'm not sure if I'm right on that. He looks kind of like him, at least going from the Recon pictures. But I know he's been in other classic Doctor Who episodes, later classic Doctor Who episodes, because I recognize him from somewhere, at least going by the pictures they're using for him in the Recon. So a lot of it is the exposition of the story with the king and the queen mother and that cabinet conversating, which of course is in the novelization. We see a lot of that here too, especially with the queen mother kind of defying the king and him threatening to send her to a convent before he kind of caves at the end. The actor playing the king's doing a really good job, by the way, just like I like the actor playing the Admiral, and I like the actor playing, I guess, the Marshal or whoever he is on the Catholic side. All three of them are doing a good job with their roles. And then the cliffhanger where we see the Abbot dead, and of course the Doctor, Stephen still thinks it's the Doctor, so he's kind of, and of course the Catholic people blame it on Stephen, saying, there's the guy who did it. Of course, they murdered the Abbot because the assassination plot that the Abbot was in on failed. And so they murdered him and then blamed it on the Protestants. Like, oh yeah, they did it. It's totally their fault. Whatever the Hugos or whatever they call them. I don't know. Yeah, they did it to get the rest of the Catholics in an uproar. Trying to instigate trouble, basically. And of course, they blame Stephen for it, so Stephen has to take off running. And that was the cliffhanger, which is a good cliffhanger, by the way. I enjoyed the episode. It's so weird because the book has so much more meat to it. There's so much more going on. If you've never read the novelization of The Massacre, you are doing yourself a disservice. If you're a fan of The Massacre especially, because the novelization of The Massacre spends so much time with the Doctor. Like, the Doctor and the Abbot both feel like peripheral characters to the story. They're more like part of the motivation for Stephen in the story than actually being in the story themselves. They're just kind of at the peripheral vision of what's going on. Whereas in the novelization, they are part of the main focus of the story with a lot of other stuff going on. The Doctor's in the story a lot. The Abbot's in the story a lot. The Doctor impersonates the Abbot a lot throughout the story. And then they just keep missing each other until the very end of the novelization, where they do actually come face to face, which I don't believe happens here, especially considering the Abbot's apparently dead. But the Abbot features a lot more heavily. The Doctor features a lot more heavily. Them almost bumping into each other happens several times. Them finally running into each other at the end happens. Although the Abbot still gets killed, although we actually see that happen. Well, see that happen in the novelization. We're there for the event. And then, but of course, the Catholics still blame the Protestants for the murder, even though they did it. So there's a lot more meat on the bones, so to speak, with the novelization. Again, like at one point with Stephen getting captured by the guards because of the curfew and him being brought before the Abbot and thinking it's the Doctor early on. The Doctor meeting the underground people who are the apothecaries who are hiding because they know they're being hunted, and the Doctor running into them. Of course, they think the Doctor's the Abbot because one of them's like, that's the Abbot, because he looks just like the Abbot, and he has to prove he's not, and he has to end up helping them. There's so much more. Watching the televised version thus far, 3 of the, 4 parts, I think the Massacre's a 4-parter, as I recall. 3 of the 4 parts in. It's watching it after having read the novelization is like watching one of the Tales of the Tardis versions of a classic story, or one of the 70s omnibus versions. So whether you're watching a cut down version of an episode or just the omnibus version, whatever you want to call it, you know, having seen the full stories, when you watch the omnibus versions or the Tales of the Tardis versions, while they're sometimes they're fine in their own rights, I tend to not mind the omnibus versions. It depends on the story, really. But you notice the things that are missing. Like, I love the Ark in Space, but with the omnibus version of it, it's just kind of for me, because I notice too heavily the things that are missing. Whereas Day of the Daleks, I'm okay with the omnibus version. It's a fine watch, but I still notice the things that are missing, like the human guy in the future who's helping the Daleks. His redemption arc is kind of cut out of the omnibus version, which changes the tone of the story, honestly, a little bit. So you notice in the omnibus versions, while some of them are fine, they usually don't supplement for the regular versions. I still prefer the regular versions of most classic stories. Even the Daemons, when I watched the omnibus version, I was like, maybe I'll like it more because it's shorter. No, I still prefer the regular version of the Daemons. I notice when stuff is missing. Having read the novelization first and going through and watching these episodes, watching the televised episodes feels like watching an omnibus version of this story. Feels like a Tales of the Tardis version of this story, because there's so much that's in the novelization that's cut out, at least thus far, and it feels stripped out. This feels like an edited down version, which, to be fair, it is. That's probably one of the reasons the scripts were reworked. Editing out for budget and editing out for time constraints. I get that. And while I'm still enjoying the TV episodes in their own right, there's so much more that happens in the novel, at least, again, going off the first 3 episodes, that I think I would prefer rereading the novel. Thus far, I've still got to watch the final episode. But it's just amazing to me how much has been chopped out of the story to make it work for the TV episodes, as opposed to what everything that's in the novelization, from which I understand the writer pulls from some of his early drafts, his early scripts, before everything was edited down. And that just, it makes it a more fleshed out, full experience. Another thing is the assassination attempt on the Admiral. In the novelization, the sharpshooter, who's really good with a gun, just happens to miss and only wound the Admiral. Whereas in the novelization, it's the Doctor calling the Admiral's name right as the assassin's firing. You know, the Doctor from back coming out of an alleyway. He's like, "Oh, Admiral." And the Admiral stops and kind of turns, and since he stops and turns, that's why he's only wounded instead of killed, which makes way more sense, honestly. And again, has the Doctor more involved in events that are happening at the time, which I find fascinating. So yes, I'm still enjoying the serial so far. Priest of Death is a good one. It's just surprising to me how little the Doctor and the Abbot actually feature in the story, honestly. Compared to what I'm used to from having read the novel. So I want to know what you think of part 3 of The Massacre. Comment down below and let's talk about it. Don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button as well. I also have a Patreon if you would like to support me on that. I want to give a shout out to Colin Coney, a top tier patron of mine. I appreciate his support as I do the support of all of my patrons. Very much appreciated. I also have a P.O. box if there's anything you'd like to send me to look at and review. Link to my Amazon wish list is down there. Link to my Amazon UK wish list is also down there. Most importantly, thank you for watching.